What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's exactly what
Remember
you're
this.
doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
cards.
cards right now. With us, you start having
cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards. You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the President who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot of
answer?
talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about you asking?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't please,
you're running
Mr.
low
President.
on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you
So we ask, what's America's interest in securing an end to the war in Ukraine? And what are the implications of a protracted Russian-Ukrainian war for Africa and America's geopolitical standing? Joining us, Nana Yamreku, he's an international relations analyst. And we also have Dr. Theo Echampo joining. Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, I beg your pardon. He's a CDD fellow. Now, it's very interesting. I will start with you, Dr. Osai-Kwapong, on this matter. We know you are wrong. J.D. Vance says so. It was more like 2 on 1, and I've read the literature on this. I've been scratching my head and wondering what exactly was happening. Some said it was bullying, that it was very antagonistic. But what did you see, Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, in this interaction? Where did it place the matters we are talking about, Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S.?
You know, I was quite surprised right, on the one hand, at the turn of events. Because normally, with these diplomatic engagements, especially over difficult issues like war and peace and how, you support a country or not, I thought that a lot of the conversations, the difficult part of the interaction and the conversations would have been had behind closed doors, privately. You hash it all out. And then when you're done, you come publicly to engage the media, knowing that all major differences have been trashed out. You take the questions, you present, basically what has been agreed upon and moving forward. So I was surprised all of this testy exchange took place in the full glare, of the public. But you also, in that interaction, you see the US's philosophy when it comes to foreign policy, right? Which is, a dominant force, a dominant player who is providing you all of this support. And so to hear the vice president even ask, have you ever said thank you? Is this idea that when we take money or when we provide you with resources to support you, there's a certain level of gratitude that is expected. And then when you look at the Ukrainian president, it feels as though in that interaction, his calculus is also, yes, I'm grateful, but that's not also the reason why I would sit here for you to, quote unquote, either like bully me.
In fact, he points to the fact that you, America, your interest is at stake in what happens here. And that in the future, if some things are not done, there could be consequences. And then Trump tells him, you are not the one to determine what the consequences will be.
Exactly. So all of that dynamics were at play. Whose interest should take precedence over the others, who is in a better position to make certain assertions and claims or not. And that for me is what created this testy, messy exchange. But like I said, I was hoping that these difficult things would have been said behind closed doors before you come before the cameras to have the easier part of the conversation.
Some people say that it wasn't necessarily planned for Zelensky to be a part of this, and that also contributed to how frosty everything the session was.
Well, normally when these leaders are invited, there's still an opportunity given to them to engage with the U.S. president or whoever is representing the administration that they in a media encounter. Anytime there is a visit, definitely there's a media part or there's a press engagement after that. So I don't think it wasn't meant for him to be part of this media engagement. I mean, if he wasn't originally, then I'm also curious as to the last, what occasioned the administration to say, okay, we'll bring him and make him part of this engagement.
Right. So, Nanayo, bringing you into the conversation, I've seen you sit, smile, scratch your head. I don't know whether you were as surprised as some of us were, and the mere Oval Office, and this is happening, and it's more like, But then there's also the issue of whether in this meeting, the purpose of the U.S. was really served. Some say that if Trump and J.D. Vance spoke Ukrainian, maybe Zelensky would have been able to defend himself better. But here he was trying to speak English with 2-on-1. But what did you make of it initially?
It's a very interesting development. I think it was a special historic moment.
Historic, right?
Yes.
Intensity.
Intensity. And in my interest in international politics, probably the most dramatic one I've witnessed was when Hugo Chavez went to UN and after and the president, the devil has been here. But this one had a lot of interest across the globe, and I think that like Trump himself said, it was good for television, and I think that Volodymyr Zelensky should have known that there was a shift or change in the political grounds on which he stood. And he should have understood the political temperature in the room. These Republicans and probably and most likely Trump, they have a long memory. they had not forgiven him for campaigning for Kamala Harris during the elections. It might seem as trivial as it is, but they still had that in their mind.
So this was an ambush and this was payback.
Exactly, to the extent that J.D. Trump brought such a domestic trivial issue to such a platform. He is the one that rehearsed that particular statement. So I think that Volodymyr Zelensky should have understood he should have de-escalated the environment by regulating the diplomatic temperature. Because before him, he had seen President Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Starmer come into the Oval Office, and how through platitude and flattery, they were able to get a way around Trump. It's diplomacy.
But let's be fair.
And I understand him. He's a leader.
When Keir Starmer came and Emmanuel Macron of France came through, while yes, it was a bit Trump will be Trump, this was antagonistic right from the start.
Yes.
And it had always been one-on-one. This was Trump and J.D. Vance ganging up, and I use those words cautiously, on Zelensky, someone who is not even fluent in English. And they were bombarding him. And on such a platform at the Oval Office, pardon me, I've never seen something like this before. Never.
And that is why I say that I believe that it was pre-planned. This is a
premeditated.
Exactly, premeditated, event. To the extent that, like Doc said, these things are done behind closed doors. And then you take some pictures, and after the major issues have been discussed. And to the fact that they allowed him to walk into this in the glaring view of the public, live television, I understand that this is the situation. But I think that, look, if he has spoken in his language, because in the aftermath of this event, when he had been to other platforms, recently when he was in Europe, he spoke in his dialect, and then it was translated into English. Because there are some words that he might have used that he thought was normal words, but it's miscommunicated something else too. When he said you can speak loudly of the situation, immediately Trump came inside and said he is not being loud. But
it's true.
Maybe he was saying it in a different context. This is somebody who learned English just when the war started and started speaking. So I think that going forward, these are some of the issues that we can begin to look at. But it was a very special, historic moment. I think it was very needless, and it doesn't really speak all of America's, diplomacy across the globe. I mean, you saw people there that held their hands, their head in their hands.
Right. And I'll quote Trump shortly. In fact, a top EU diplomat says, "Free world needs new leader," after this clash. That was one of them saying that the free world needs a new leader. But just quoting Trump, he says, "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." Dr. Osai-Kwapong, is that the feeling you got when you listened to Zelensky?
Could you please repeat that?
So Trump says, he posted after this, and it's a lengthier post, but part of it says, "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." Fair?
I don't agree that he's not ready for peace. I mean, for what his country has gone through, I'm sure he would love to have peace. He would love to bring this thing to an end. That is my reading. As to the fact that he disrespected the Oval Office, again, you have to also put that within the context of how the US feels about the sacred nature of the Oval Office. In fact, if you've watched the movie The American President, there's a line in there that talks about the Oval Office being the one place that presents, it was specially designed to sort of humble people who come in there to try and negotiate for something within that. So there's that sanctity that is always attached to the Oval Office. And so when you see this kind of exchange, I can see why President Donald Trump would walk away thinking, who comes to the Oval Office to do this? Because that expectation is not there that you should be able to walk into the Oval Office and engage the President of the United States that way. President Zelensky probably did not have, and I mean this respectfully, probably did not have a full appreciation of that kind of sanctity that is attached to the Oval Office, which on that score, I normally would not give President Donald Trump props for anything. But I think on that score, I can see why the administration will feel very disrespected that you don't, quote unquote, do this in the White House.
But a quick point, Dr. Osei-Kwapong, I've watched a lot of interactions all the way from the time of senior George Bush, not even when, the point referenced by Nana Ado-Mensah, when at the UN, I believe it was the General Assembly, and the Venezuelan leader spoke, and Bush Jr. had just spoken, and he said to him, I can smell the sulfur, the devil was just here. Not even there was there a response. So sanctity of the Oval Office, yes, but diplomacy speaks in a certain direction. This has never been seen, regardless of such sanctity.
Right. I mean, you're correct. This has never been seen, especially again in the Oval Office, which is why I keep also going back to the point of I found it quite surprising that the difficult conversations were not had before this public engagement. I mean, I think back to, you recall when President Clinton was able to bring the late Arafat and the late Yitzhak Rabin to Camp David, right? I'm sure the conversations they had before that, quote unquote, nice diplomatic press conference was not an easy conversation. But by the time they both addressed the media in 2 questions, it was a nice, smooth exchange of answering questions and things like that. So for me, I also hope this is a lesson to the administration, right? That certain diplomatic issues, you don't engage in it this way.
Right. Nanayo, Ukraine is suffering. It's getting battered. And you can also look at the Russian end and what the consequences have been for their economy. But is Ukraine a mere pawn in all of this? And why do I ask? Ukraine wants protection from both the EU and the US. And later I'll get to the numbers in terms of how much has been spent and all of that. Russia has taken part of Ukraine's land and what they see to be part of the greater Russia as it was back then. And they are not ceding. The US wants Ukrainian minerals, rare earth and other minerals. Where does this leave Ukraine? Is it a lose-lose situation for Ukraine?
That's a good question. There are critics, there are intellectual stalwarts within America's, academia, John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs, who have, given a chronology of how things got to where they are in the first place. And personally, I think that Volodymyr Zelensky or Ukraine could have been more strategic with their demands, because I know they have full sovereignty until now. They have, they are an independent nation, and so they decide where they want to be. But there is also the geopolitics of the day, and Russia considers Ukraine and some of these eastern part as sphere of influence. Look, the United States almost had, a Cuban Missile Crisis, almost engaged with Russia. Exactly. Over Russia's influence in that area, Cuba, what you call the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. There's no way the United States will allow any major power to use its backyard.
Which brings them to mind, why did they also go the way they did in some of what now led to Putin also saying, this can't be tolerated. Exactly.
And even Ukraine is aware, at the end of the Cold War, right, you had the US Secretary of State, James Baker. He was not the only person. You had the then Chancellor of Germany, Chancellor Kohl, and then you have the NATO Secretary Defense General, right? I think Manfred Wörner, who said that they were not going to move an inch into the east. And this has sunk well into the mindset of Russia. It has lost most of its, state at the end of the Cold War. And if you take Ukraine out, of the picture, there are 4 countries that directly have access to Russia: Poland, Slovakia, Hungary. These are countries that Ukraine is the only country standing in between them. So once Ukraine is out of the zone, what it means is that in the mindset of Russia, their sphere of influence is vulnerable, their security architecture and arrangement is also vulnerable. So Ukraine should have understood how dire or critical the situation is before in my opinion, they allow themselves to be pawns, because at the end of the day, it is not Western European countries that are suffering from, in terms of numbers, the people that are dying, the real impact. So if there is a president who wants to bring an amicable solution to it, look, at the end of the day, there will be collateral damages, there will be losses. That is what war does. But if you are able to accept some of these, because look, there is no way Crimea or the Donbass region, Luhansk and Donetsk, are going to be in the hands of the Ukraine. That is something that the Russians will never accept. And that is what Ukraine is also not ready to agree to. So it's a then-ed situation. I mean, as far as it stands now, getting to that point is very difficult. And that is why Donald Trump is saying that, look, let's understand this mineral agreement. Because once we sign the mineral agreement, that means that U.S. is economically invested in Ukraine. And what it means is that it keeps the Russians at bay. But, and I understand Volodymyr Zelensky, this is not the first time there would have been an agreement. There was the Minsk agreement in 2015. Before that, there was the Budapest Memorandum in 1990. Russia has violated all these agreements. So what shows that if you sign this mineral agreement and my security and my sovereignty are not guaranteed, what shows that Russia will uphold its side of the argument?
A quick follow-up for you. There's the ethical component of saying, oh, we're giving you support, and so give us your minerals in return. Already, the image that has been created is that the U.S., I mean, like we say, there's no free lunch. We don't do anything for free, and so if we give you something, there must be a catch. Remember, that same talk has been in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, that always when there's an interest of oil or something, then they may come in. I'm talking of the global image, right? So ethically, there's a question. Then you also look at it from the standpoint that there is Ukrainian land, in quote, that is now under Russia. And Russia is willing to give out some of the mineral resources there, which technically, someone would say, is not their land.
Right.
Do you get it? When you look at it from that perspective, how can one be fair to Ukraine on this point? Because then you've lost some of your land, which Russia is giving to the Americans maybe for mineral resources. So it's not their land, but they are giving it away as though it were. Then you are also expected to make similar commitments. If you look at the quid pro quo, does it work for Ukraine?
It's a lot to unpack. So in the first instance, we need to understand Donald Trump. And for the next 4 years, things will be done his way. And so we need to understand how he likes things to be done. And I've said always he's a transactional pragmatist. There is no way he's going to give you something without getting something in return. Otherwise, it is very unethical for you to beat somebody when they are down. And that is what it looks like is happening to Ukraine. You know, that you are trying to get minerals from them at a very critical time when they need your help, because you know your help is indispensable to their survival. And so it is very unethical. But then again, this is somebody who has said America has committed $350 billion without, and in fact check, that is not
that is not the case, because it's around 150 billion.
Yes.
Where Europe has contributed north of 130 billion.
Yes.
But if you look at the reality, Europe has made a lot of commitments that it has not actually met.
Exactly. The non-humanitarian aspect is where Europe comes in. America does 3 things in defense. Air defense systems, air anti-missile defense system, the air power. And then they provide the intelligence, which is very crucial for the survival of the Ukrainians. And interestingly, the intelligence system is provided by Starlink, which is owned by Elon Musk. So they provide the firepower, the air defense missile system, and then the intelligence. The Europeans are largely providing what you call the non-humanitarian aspect of the defense system. So America is indispensable, regardless of how Europe comes around, like what Starmer and other European countries are doing now. Can you count the number of times in Starmer's speech he mentioned how indispensable the Americans are? So you need the Americans in the next 4-6 years, in order to make sure this deal comes to the table. So what they are doing is that once Europe has agreed to a plan, like what Starmer said, then they will get back to the Americans as to what the plan is, and then they move forward. But I think Volodymyr Zelensky has sounded the word that he's ready to go back to the negotiation table. Right. You would have imagined that if, in quote, he had been embarrassed, with his chest up high, he probably wouldn't come to the Americans. But immediately he made a reverse, because he knows that without the Americans,
at stake.
Exactly.
Right.
According to what I'm hearing, if they don't get the American support, they are going to, suffer just getting to the summer. It's a very precarious, moment for them. So I think that this situation could have been salvaged. What happened in the Oval Office could have been, once again, I think that it was a planned attack. It was an ambush. But look, it was Winston Churchill, right? And I quote him. He said that, and when he was dealing with Roosevelt, he said that no lover has known the whims of their mistress than he did Franklin Roosevelt. So what it means that when you are dealing with world leaders, you need to understand how they are, so you can get what you want from them, wherever you meet them.
Let me bring in Dr. John Osai-Kwapong. Some have suggested that America stands to lose about over 100 billion, what they've spent so far in Ukraine, if Ukraine falls. I don't know what picture you see from there, but then there's also the domino effect, because there's Finland, there's Denmark, there's Poland. There are some of these other areas, some of them though aligned to NATO. What do you think the picture could be in 2025, looking at the posturing of the White House, or should I say the presidency, versus Ukraine and their precarious situation?
Already, as you even read the statement from President Donald Trump, which is, look, come back when you're ready for peace. I believe I read somewhere that the State Department, some U.S. support that was going to Ukraine, the State Department is indicating that it's going to put a hold on that. But I've also read that President Zelensky has indicated that, look, I'm not backing out of the minerals deal. I'm more than happy to sign that agreement. At the end of the day, each of these players would have to think about their own strategic interest, do a cost-benefit analysis, and ask themselves, if I disengage, is what I lose bigger than what I gain, or the other way around? And I think that would inform what each of the players do. With President Donald Trump, if you think back to the statement he made where he says to Zelensky, at this point, something to the effect of, you have no bargaining power, you are not at an advantage position. I'm sure the administration's calculus is that we have the upper hand, we are the stronger player in here, and Ukraine stands to lose more than we do if things fall apart. If they go into further conversations and negotiations with that mindset, and if what President Zelensky showed in the Oval Office would also continue to be his posture, then we can expect a protracted, conversations trying to get this resolved.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that, for example, European leaders would also step in to smoothing out some of these things, because ultimately, I'm not sure it is in.
Hello? Okay, let me come into the studio. We lost you briefly. Please go ahead.
Yes, so I was saying that I'm just hoping that at some point, though, European leaders would also step in to smoothing some of the tensions that have come up, because it is also in their best interest to not have a protracted Russia-Ukraine dispute,
right?
And the United States that is also extremely unhappy with one of the actors because they feel disrespected.
I'll come back to you for some 20 seconds of a final words, but before we get into that, cards came into the picture because Trump said that he had no cards to play, Zelensky, and Zelensky also mentioned that this was not a game of cards. It was like, for someone who doesn't speak English too well, I think he was pretty... There is also the end of Kemi Badenoch, the conservative leader, saying that Zelensky is a hero. SNP in Scotland, there's some convention that when you're a one-term, when you come in your first term to the UK, and all that, you don't come if you have a second term. There's some arrangement. Keir Starmer, on behalf of the King, is inviting Trump over. People are against that, and the SNP leaders are saying, we don't want him in Scotland. How do you unpack these issues very, very briefly?
Well, I think that UK's greatest ally, probably outside of Europe, has always been traditionally the United States. And it's the political atmosphere in the UK right now people are not really happy with the way things went down in the Oval Office. Zelensky is never the aggressor, you know, it's rather Vladimir Putin. So when you have a leader of the free world comes across as rather chastising, you know, the victim rather than the villain, it is not so much, you know, the political tradition within the United Kingdom. But I think that once again, UK also understand the geopolitics of the day, and they know that it is very difficult to go the long haul without the Americans.
Right.
And so if you've seen what has been happening, Steinmeier is not, I don't envy his position at this particular moment because he has to navigate carefully. He's working on a very thin line between how to please the American president and at the same time ensure that his country and then the European security architecture is also solid. And so he has to play, and right now I don't see...
In fact, I don't know whether it was Kemi or someone, he's been told to get off his knees.
Right.
When it comes to the US.
Right.
The right thing.
But that is diplomacy. Sometimes this is the extent you have to go to ensure that you get what you want. And at this moment, I don't see any leader playing that role better than the Prime Minister of UK. So I think that this extension of invitation to Donald Trump is good for the whole security and defense architecture of Europe and the United States as well. And I think that unless something happens dramatically, and Trump is an unpredictable figure, anything can happen. But if that doesn't happen, I think it's a good move, you know, to bring him to the side. All right.
And over in the US, there have been pro-Ukraine demonstrations on the back of that Oval Office meeting. But what would be your final words, Dr. Osai-Kwapong?
Well, I'm just hoping that sooner rather than later, a way will be found out of this impasse, because everybody has strategic interests at stake. Whatever you believe it is or it's not, you want to get these things resolved. I also hope that this would be a lesson for the administration not to avoid certain kinds of public diplomacy, because you just never know when you would have another President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and you don't want this kind of showdown.
All right. Thank you very much for joining the conversation, gentlemen. Dr. John Osai-Kwapong is a CDD fellow. He also focuses on governance-related matters. We're grateful for your time. Nana Yaw Amoako is an international relations analyst, and he also joined the conversation. Thank you, Nana Yaw.
Thank you.
You always are a breath of fresh air when it comes to these matters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Well, that's how we wrap up this conversation. Thank you for watching. Stay with us. We'll be right back.